the East Coast to the West Coast and around the world on the internet. We're coming to you live from the CCRS studios. WNJC 1360. This is the Conservative Commandos radio show with your host, Rick Trader. The Conservative Commandos radio show, where the newsmakers go to be heard. You can call the Conservative Commandos radio show at 856-227-1360. Your opinion counts at 856-227-1360.
This is Congressman Alan West, and you're listening to the Conservative Commando radio show.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome, fellow patriots. Welcome once again to the Conservative Commandos radio show. I'm Rick Trader, coming to you live from the studios of the Conservative Commandos radio network here at WNJC 1360 in Philadelphia and around the world on the internet with American Patriots Broadcasting, TalkStream Live, SHR Media, K98 Talk, iHeartRadio, AM, FM 24/7, and a whole bunch of others. If I read you the whole list, we'd be here all day. But joining me today as my co-host is this President and CEO of Frontiers of Freedom. And that's my good friend, George Landreth. George, welcome to the Conservative Commandos.
It is great to be here.
Great to have you with us.
Merry Christmas.
Today. Merry Christmas to you, George. How will the Landreths be celebrating it? I know you've got like 7 children, and I don't know how many grandchildren, but how does the Landreth family celebrate Christmas?
Well, we, it's at our house. It's one with a fair amount of noise, I suspect, described by just the numbers. But of course, the mantle across the fireplace is filled with stockings that my wife has lovingly cross-stitched.
Oh, wow.
And it's quite a collection, as you might imagine. Mm-hmm. But we typically will do a little bit on some things on Christmas Eve that are have kind of a religious significance to them, to remember kind of the purpose of the season. And Christmas morning, of course, we get up. Fortunately, since the kids are older now, it's not when they were real little. They of course woke up with the sun, which is always kind of a bummer because the night before, you're assembling bikes or whatever else is you're doing, so that bedtime is always much later than you would have dreamed. So now, one, there's not bikes to put together, and two, older kids don't want to get up with the sun. So that's to my liking. But basically, then we it's just a family day. We open presents. We have a wonderful meal together. We spend time together. I've got a son who is out serving a mission, and so because he's away from home and it's Christmas, we will have a chance to video chat with him in the day, and that'll be a highlight of the day, of course. And then, of course, eat some more and get fat some more, that kind of stuff. But now this Sunday, because it's actually on a Sunday, I guess we'll go to church first. So we'll get up in the morning, we'll go to church, and that seems appropriate. I heard somewhere that there were churches that were canceling church, and I thought to myself, really?
What?
I don't know. Do you cancel church on like Easter?
Well,
I was stunned to hear that there was some canceling. So this year, of course, we'll go to church first, and then we'll kind of carry on with the family traditions and so forth. And the evening before, like I said, we do stuff. How about you guys?
Catholics never cancel church. I mean, there's masses all times for all kinds of reasons.
Right.
But our holiday actually, or our Christmas starts on Christmas Eve. George, I actually enjoy Christmas Eve as much as I do Christmas Day because it's all the preparation. It's the wrapping of the gifts. It's baking. It's people calling or us calling people. And then Christmas evening or Christmas Eve evening, we go to a family function where all the wife's family and cousins are. We always enjoy that. We follow that by Midnight Mass. Midnight Mass has always been a tradition with us. I love music. Well, actually, I could say we start our Christmas tomorrow. we go and we help to decorate our church, which Mary and I always look forward to doing. And Christmas Eve in the evening, as I said, we visit family, Mary's family, followed by midnight mass. Then Christmas morning, we wake up and open our presents and visit my mother-in-law who lives next door. She's 103. This is our 103rd Christmas. And
does she still believe in Santa?
I haven't asked her that question. I do need to ask her that.
Fair enough.
But she was probably there when Santa was born, being 103. And then it's family dinner, and followed by that, the wife and I like to ride around and look at Christmas lights.
That sounds awesome.
So
those are some good traditions. Well, I've got we had a funny thing happen at our house one year. One of our younger children was starting to figure out that what maybe the real scoop was on Santa, and so we. And I've never really wanted to lie to my kids about the whole thing. So he comes to me and says, "Dad, come on, really, is Santa real? Seriously?" And he's looking me in the eye and he goes, "You got to tell me the truth." Mm-hmm. So I just looked at him and said, "That's what my mom always told me."
And there you go. You're out of it.
And then and he took that as a yes, mm-hmm. and kind of goes, "Oh, okay." Mm-hmm. And so then for the next 2 years, he was sold that Santa was real because anyhow. So but it was funny.
Yep. I think back, my poor mother and father. I never had children, so I never had to stay up till 3, 4, or 5 or all night long putting together bikes and things. But I think back, my poor mother and father. They would put up the tree. My dad would set up the train platforms. They would put out the gifts. And looking back in retrospect, I understand why they were always so tired on Christmas Day.
Yeah. Well, we used to do this when the kids were little, which is my wife would get a Santa Claus costume, mm-hmm. and then I would feign. This would usually be like a couple days before Christmas. It wouldn't necessarily be Christmas Eve, and then I would feign not feeling well, or I was busy, had to go back to the office to get something done, mm-hmm. and they would go on a walk through the woods behind our house in a nice little area that's, and then I would very quickly, as soon as they had disappeared, jump into the costume, jump in the car, drive around the other side of the neighborhood path through the woods. Uh-huh. I'd be dressed up as Santa Claus, out looking for one of my reindeer who had run off, and I was trying to find it ready.
Oh, I bet they got a big surprise out of that.
So yeah, and so it was we used to do that every year, and every year this would happen like clockwork.
Yep.
And I remember, and then after Santa Claus then posed for pictures with them and met with them and so mm-hmm. forth, and exchanged all the ho-ho-hos, I would then walk back through the woods, jump in the car, drive back home, get out of the thing, and then I would, if I was gone at the office, I'd quickly then drive away and then wait for them to get home. Laura would let me know they were home, and then I'd come back in like, "Oh, good. Well, so what happened?" And the little kid, like, "You won't believe it, Dad!" And one year, the kid looks at me and goes, he comes running upstairs because that year I was feigning not feeling well. Mm-hmm. I jumped back in the bed as I heard them. I'm lying down like I'm asleep, and he comes running and goes, "Dad, guess what? We saw Santa Claus again!" And he goes, "And you missed him again!" I'm like, "Wow, that's amazing." Anyhow, so some fun memories.
Absolutely fun memories. My father always loved Christmas, and I think that's where my love of Christmas has come from. The acorn don't fall too far from the tree, and I remember, God bless my dad, I remember one Christmas, we had these 2 neighborhood children, two little girls that lived next door to us. And and their father was out of work. And this was in the days before welfare and unemployment and food stamps and whatever. And I can remember him coming to me and saying that, well, Santa Claus won't be able to bring me as many gifts this year because some of my gifts have to go to the 2 little girls, Vivian and Cecile, next door. And of course, I was upset by that. No little kid wants to think that their rations of presents are going somewhere else, but I obviously today remember that incident and remember my father, my mother on Christmas. So.
Right. Absolutely. It's a wonderful time of year, I think, for obviously spiritual, religious reasons. And then I think there's just some sort of familial ties that get created because of those things and memories that make it special on another level as well. So to me, Christmas is awesome because it is rich and deep on so many different levels.
Indeed it is. Well, this year...
Right, Christmas, I know what you can enjoy.
This year, Christmas falling on Saturday, Christmas Eve on Saturday, Christmas Day on Sunday. We won't be preempting the Conservative Commandos radio show for that, but on Saturday at 3:30, I'm encouraging our regular listeners to tune in here at WNJC 1360 or check out 1360radio.com to hear our version of our Christmas show. What we do is we do Christmas songs and Christmas song parodies and Christmas readings like 'Twas the Night Before Christmas. Is there Virginia, there really is a Santa Claus? So I encourage our listeners to tune into that Saturday at Saturday at 3:30.
Excellent.
For that show. Always enjoy listening to that myself. Always love to play the Christmas parodies, the Christmas political parodies. That's a lot of fun. So tune in for that this Saturday at 3:30 here at WNJC 1360 around the world on the internet. We'll also be putting that up on our website so people can hear that. And George, what we'll do is we'll take a break now, and you are listening to the Conservative Commandos radio show with George Landreth and Rick Trader, coming to you from the studios of the Conservative Commandos radio network at WNJC 1360 in Philadelphia, around the world on the internet with American Patriots Broadcasting, TalkStream Live, SHR Media, K98 Talk, iHeartRadio, AM, FM 24/7. Today's show, like all our shows, is being brought to you by the good old First Amendment and is protected by the good old Second Amendment. Don't go away, George, and I'll be right back with more news and commentary. They say I'm nasty, but
The Conservative Commandos radio show is expanding to become the Conservative Commandos radio network. We are establishing a front line of conservative radio broadcasters and ironclad patriots to declare war against the madness of liberalism and the Obama administration. Are you tired of the disregard for our Constitution? Do you still have faith in the American dream? Are you looking for sensible, smart radio? If so, listen to the Conservative Commandos radio network every weekday from 11 a.m. to 7 p.m. and Saturdays from 2 to 6 p.m. on WNJC Radio, 1360 on your AM dial, or around the world on the internet at WNJCradio.com. Check out our website, CCRSnetwork.com, for rebroadcasts and network updates. We are the Conservative Commandos Radio Network, where now even more newsmakers go to be heard.
This is Pastor Christina Lamanier, chaplain for the INRA.
And I'm her husband, J.D. Manier. We help co-host on the Conservative Commandos radio show, and we want to sincerely thank our listeners who turned out to vote in mass to elect Donald Trump, Governor Mike Pence, and conservative congressional candidates across our nation.
Against incredible odds, you helped create the strongest GOP team to take the reins of power in Washington since the 1920s. General George Patton said, "It's the unconquerable soul of man, not the nature of the weapon he uses, that ensures victory." We salute all of you for taking a stand for truth, freedom, and defending our constitutional form of government. Let us continue to pray for our nation and for God's blessings. May God save the United States of America.
You can call the Conservative Commandos radio show at 856-227-1360. Your opinion counts at 856-227-1360.
This is Congressman Alan West, and you're listening to the Conservative Commando radio show.
Welcome back to the Conservative Commandos radio show with George Landreth and yours truly, Rick Trader. And for rebroadcasts of our shows, please check out our websites, ccrshow.com or ccrsnetwork.com. Or at 8 a.m., log on to the Leading Edge Radio Network, or at 11 p.m., highplainstalkradio.com, where you can hear this show and all the shows that are part of the Conservative Commandos here at WNJC 1360 any time of the day from your telephone by calling 832-999-1199, 832-999-1199. You don't need an app. You don't need to download anything. You just need that phone number. So, George, in the first part of the show, we talked about what Christmas will be like at each other's houses, but unfortunately, things around the world will not be as great as they will in your household, in mine. There was another terrible terrorist attack this past week in Germany, and it looks like, it's more Islamic terrorism, George. George, it's time to turn off the mute button.
Yep, there you go again. Thank you. No, I think you're right about the Tunisian suspect in Berlin. The evidence points pretty strongly towards Islamic terrorism. ISIS is involved. Interestingly, his name is Anis Amari. I think I'll just call him Anis.
More fitting.
Yeah, right, exactly. And it's that's his name, so why not? At any rate, so he is apparently part of the this growing dialogue about whether or not Angela Merkel's bringing 1 million asylum seekers last year into the country is a good idea or not. I thought some interesting things. A policeman asked this question. I thought it was he said, "Why a failed asylum seeker, which with such links and no passport was walking German streets, is a question 82 million Germans probably want an answer to." Yeah, I would think so. I mean, if I were an American, I'd want an answer to that question.
And George, a lot of people are criticizing Donald Trump because he said he wants to cut off or greatly throttle down the immigration coming from the Islamic world. And I think this points out every reason why he's right in doing so. They don't know who's coming in from overseas. They don't have any way of checking their background. Even if they did, George, I'm sure there would be people with bad intentions coming in that group. And these people, George, are not people who want to assimilate into the American society, the American way of life, the American culture. They want to bring their culture here and change or force us to it, not only to accept their culture, but to change our culture to theirs.
Right. I mean, they're not terribly interested in, they don't want to come to America because they're hoping to become part of the American experience. Instead, they really are looking for the opportunity to bring America down. It's interesting when you hear some of the interviews of from folks that have been questioning the terrorists, over the last many years, and they all point out that they think it's hilarious that we've got this, all these rights that we accord them, and that they're very happy to use those rights that we accord them to destroy us.
Yeah.
And they view that as, a gift, so to speak. So, we have to try to figure out how to solve this problem. I don't want to become a police state, and I certainly don't want to lose my rights. But we do have to figure out how to balance things. And one thing that people have to understand is that Trump is absolutely right about this very important point, which is nobody has a right to come to America unless they're actually already an American. And so no foreigner has a right to become an American. They just don't have that right. And we have to be willing to accept that reality, because too many people seem to think like, oh, you can't, they have a right. They don't have a right to come here. So once you establish that they don't have a right to come here, then you have to figure out how. I'm actually for immigration, but I want to make sure the people who come here, it's like I like having guests at my house too, having friends come visit, but I don't let people into my house who might be there to harm my wife and children. We should have the same standard for people who come into our country. We should, we can invite people to come here as long as we know who they are and why they're coming. And we have confidence that they are here for the right reasons. If we lack that confidence, then they can't come in. And to be perfectly blunt, most of the places in the world that cannot establish that fact, then a lot of those places happen to be the kind of places that we're talking about. These areas of the world where jihadis tend to congregate and so forth. That's not religious discrimination. That's just a reality, which is the test you have to meet is you've got to be able to demonstrate that you are who you say you are, that you're here for the right reasons, that you're safe, that you're coming to America for reasons that we can approve of and agree with, not that you're coming here to kill us. That's pretty rational, reasonable stuff. And if you can't accept that as rational, reasonable, then you're the kook. And I think, I think that's what's too many people like to call names and say that, Trump's this. This is very rational stuff. I don't know that he always said it in exactly the right way or the most clear way occasionally. I think there are times where, he said things maybe a little bit in a way that, but when you boil it down to what he's talking about, what he's talking about is pretty rational. And I find it odd that people can't accept that fact. They all want to focus on the fact that, but he said he's going to ban Muslims. I understand that's what he said. And then when he explained what he wanted to do, he explained it just how I explained it. And obviously banning Muslims isn't going to work because if he says, are you Muslim? They're going to lie to you and say, no, I'm not. But when you do what he talks about, which he calls it extreme vetting, I wouldn't call it extreme vetting. I just call it common sense vetting.
Yep.
It's not really extreme. Extreme vetting would be something, different. To me, this is like the base. This is what I would expect. This isn't extreme. This is like, doggone it, you better be doing this. And he's right to do it. So I'm just quibbling over the name of it because so often they like to call us extremists. And I'm just like, this isn't extreme. It's rational. It's reasonable. It's what should be done. And he's dead on right. And they don't want to talk about what he's right on. What they do is, the first time he talked about it, he said he was going to ban Muslims.
Well, there is precedent for it, George. If you wanted to ban them, Jimmy Carter banned Iranians from coming into our country back into the 1970s. So there is precedent.
Yeah. Well, and it comes down to this simple question, which is no one has a right to come to America unless you're already an American citizen. But for everyone else, you're here at our invitation and with our permission. And I think too many people forget that fact. And so there's, again, I find it curious when people spend their time. And to me, it's kind of this is partly an IQ test. It's partly an honesty test. If you can't kind of discuss these topics reasonably and rationally, then either you're nutty or you're not very honest. But to me, there's something discordant here. If all you want to do is tell me, but the first time he mentioned this, he said he was going to ban all Muslims. I'm just like, okay, fine. I'm either talking with a person who can't have an honest conversation or I'm talking with a person who can't think rationally. But there's some problem here that's going to prevent us from having a meaningful conversation, because the reality is, if you are an American who wants to invite into America the exact same thing that Angela Merkel has invited into Germany, you have serious problems. That's crazy. And that's what we're talking about. And if you'd rather talk about something else, fine. But that's the weird kind of world that people live in sometimes.
George, in the last minute we have before we have to take another break, quick question for you. Do you think that Germany has or will have an opportunity to deport a lot of these Muslims that they can't vet? Or is that damage that can never be repaired?
I do think they'll be able to deport some of them. The problem is once you let them in, it's hard to find them. Mm-hmm. And so you'll find some through traffic stops and normal means, and you can deport them. But the trick is you really ought not have your national security reliant upon rounding up people. It's like once you invite 100 people into your house, if you're going to protect your wife and children by getting them out of the house, what if they're hiding under the bed? You've complicated things. It's much, much easier to defend yourself by, in the first instance, not letting people in who shouldn't be in.
Well, that's another reason why that Donald Trump is right. Hey, George, our audience is listening to the Conservative Commandos radio show with George Landreth, President and CEO of Frontiers of Freedom, and yours truly, Rick Trader, coming to you from the studios of the Conservative Commandos radio network at WNJC 1360 in Philadelphia and around the world on the internet with American Patriots Broadcasting, TalkStream Live, SHR Media, K98 Talk, iHeartRadio, AM, FM 24/7. Don't go away, George, and I'll be right back.
They say I'm crazy. I really don't care. That's my prerogative. They say I'm nasty, but
This is Rick Trader, host of the Conservative Commandos radio show.
And I'm John Forsyth, owner of WNJC Radio. Fellow patriots, the Conservative Commandos radio show is for conservatives, about conservatives, and by conservatives.
We are patriots who want to take our country back from the likes of Barack Obama, Harry Reid, George Soros, and Nancy Pelosi.
But we can't keep up this fight without your critical support today. Can you help? Please go to www.helpccrs.com right now and make a donation by credit card or PayPal. That's www.helpccrs.com.
Our goal is to expose the liberal agenda and distortions. We are fighting to spread the truth about political issues, political leaders, and conservative issues and values.
Our hosts are not paid. In fact, we buy our own airtime, studio time, and pay our own expenses.
We created the show because we are trying to make a difference. So can you help the CCRS expose the truth in 2014 and beyond? Go to www.helpccrs.com.
Help keep the Conservative Commandos radio show on the air by going to www.helpccrs.com and make a donation today to return our country to the conservative roots created by our founding fathers.
This is Pastor Christina Lamanier, chaplain for the INRA.
And I'm her husband, J.D. Manier. We help co-host on the Conservative Commandos radio show, and we want to sincerely thank our listeners who turned out to vote in mass to elect Donald Trump, Governor Mike Pence, and conservative congressional candidates across our nation.
Against incredible odds, you helped create the strongest GOP team to take the reins of power in Washington since the 1920s. General George Patton said, "It's the unconquerable soul of man, not the nature of the weapon he uses, that ensures victory." We salute all of you for taking a stand for truth, freedom, and defending our constitutional form of government. Let us continue to pray for our nation and for God's blessings. May God save the United States of America.
What does it take to be the leader in production systems technology? To be the one company that solves production problems at any plant, for any product, and with any technology? It takes a 30-year record of success. It takes total mastery of complex technologies with a history of delivering success every time, without fail. Only one company can claim that high ground in manufacturing line optimization, data automation, and systems integration, and that's Philadelphia Control Systems. In factories worldwide, Philadelphia Control Systems programs, software, and engineering solutions deliver optimal performance and output flow with a record that can't be matched. Any plant, any product, any technology. Philadelphia Control Systems, the leader in production automation since 1982. 800-335-9811. PCS4automation.com. That's PCS, the number 4, automation.com.
The Conservative Commandos radio show is expanding to become the Conservative Commandos Radio Network. We're establishing a front line of conservative radio broadcasters and ironclad patriots to declare war against the madness of liberalism and the Obama administration. Are you tired, as I am, about the disregard for our Constitution? Do you still have faith in the American dream? Are you looking for sensible, smart radio? If so, listen to the Conservative Commandos Radio Network every weekday from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. on WNJC Radio 1360 a.m. or around the world on the internet at WNJCradio.com. Check out our websites, ConservativeCommandosRadioNetwork.com and CCRN.com for rebroadcasts and network updates. We are the Conservative Commandos Radio Network, where even more newsmakers go to be heard. From the East Coast to the West Coast and around the world on the internet, we're coming to you live from the CCRS studios, WNJC 1360. This is the Conservative Commandos radio show with your host, Rick Trader. The Conservative Commandos radio show, where the newsmakers go to be heard. You can call the Conservative Commandos radio show at 856-227-1360. Your opinion counts at 856-227-1360.
This is Congressman Alan West, and you're listening to the Conservative Commando Radio Show.
Welcome back to the Conservative Commandos Radio Show with George Landreth and yours truly, Rick Trader. And for rebroadcasts of our shows, please check out our website, ccrshow.com or ccrsnetwork.com. Or at any time, you can pick up our show from the telephone. You can hear our show any time of the day from your telephone by calling 832-999-1199. And my co-host today, as I mentioned, is George Landreth. And George, the final vote total is in. And if it wasn't for California and New York, two places that Donald Trump did not campaign in, but if it wasn't for California and New York, he would have won the popular vote by over 3 million.
Yeah, that's the truth. It's one of the reasons why people always say, why do we even have the Electoral College? And I think it's to make it a national election. The purpose of it is to put us in a position where the country becomes important. You saw people campaigning in states that if it were just a popular vote, they'd never campaign in. They'd focus primarily in California and New York, yep, and a few other states. Whereas they were campaigning in New Hampshire and they were, in Wisconsin, and so the idea is, I think that's important. That's an important part of this because it's the President of the United States, not just the President of one or two big urban centers.
Well, and as you say, it shows the importance of the Electoral College. If it wasn't for the Electoral College, two states, California and New York, would put its stamp on the rest of the nation. Yep.
You'd end up with policies that would be interesting and important to essentially a very small segment of the society.
And Donald Trump, when questioned about this, said, well, I knew the rules. If it was a direct popular vote, I would have changed the way I campaigned, which made a lot of sense.
No, that is a very fair point. When people say things like, oh, he didn't win the popular vote. Well, that's like a football game when one team gets a lot of yardage, and so they have, or they won the time of possession, or they got more yardage. The other team wins. The problem is by saying, well, but look, we did really well there. The other team understood the scoreboard, what counts, it's what matters. So they. Yep. So they may have a bend don't break defense, which lets you run up and down the field, but once you get inside the 20, they clamp down on you. That's fine, but that's not the same as winning, and I think people have to understand that. So that's why Hillary won the popular vote. No, Hillary didn't win anything. She lost. If you want to spend your time trying to concoct ways that you can say she won, then you're essentially arguing my team won because it got more yardage, but not more points. My team won because it had more time of possession, not because it had more points, which is to say your team didn't win.
Another thing you have to look at, George, what we have to tell people continuously is this is not a democracy. This is a republic. There's a difference in how democracies govern and how republics govern. We are a republic. We are a nation of laws. We're not a nation of let's vote for every little thing. And whoever gets the most votes, well, that's what we do. We're not a democracy. People must understand.
I do think that's an important point. There are several things the founders did not want the public to even be able to vote on. They didn't want them to be able to vote on whether or not certain religions would be sanctioned or approved by government and others be disfavored. They didn't want to have official ministries of truth or that could approve political opinions. They said, no, we're not going to have any of that. Your government doesn't matter if there's 99% of the public. You can't have official government religions or official government approved opinions. I know this presidency likes that. He wants to have climate change be an official government approved position, and they target people who disagree with them. But that's unconstitutional, and our founders did not want that to happen. They wanted the public to be able to come up to its own mind on various issues, and it's the statists and the people who want to use government to impose their will on us that like the idea of government telling us what we can think, what we can believe, where we can go to church, political views we have to agree to or think are important.
Speaking of government and politics and church, George, there has been an arrest made in the burning of a Mississippi black church, and the arson painted the words on the church as he torched it, "Vote Trump."
Right. Now, my recollection is, correct me if I'm wrong, that this was a guy that the media told us there was obviously some angry, racist Trump supporter who set a black church on fire. Spoiler alert! I don't think so.
You don't think so?
Yeah, so to finish telling us the story, though.
Oh, I'll let you.
Okay, well, turns out the guy they arrested was a parishioner at that church who happened to be a black man, and apparently he did it because he wanted to try to make Trump look bad. That's the only thing you can come up with, but the fellow's name, let me find it in the story here. That's the spokesman. Yeah, it's McClinton. That's interesting. His name is McClinton.
Okay, might be irrelevant.
Clinton was arrested Wednesday. He burned down Hopewell Ministry Baptist Church in Greenville, Mississippi. It was burned and vandalized the week before the presidential election. Anyhow, so McClinton he's African American. He started the fire, and the idea was that it was to look like an angry Trump supporter did it. So this is why I think it's important that when people hear the news, you recognize that it's not always what it appears to be. And the mainstream media is, of course, never going to focus us on the word alleged. They're always going to portray the story they're going to go with. We saw that. Remember when the nightclub down in Orlando got shot up?
Yes.
They desperately wanted that to be one of the conservative Commandos listeners. They wanted it to be one of us. It was important to them that it be they wanted to be some homophobic, angry, right-winger. That's what they were hoping for. The facts got in the way, and sadly that's not what they got, but that's what they were hoping for. And that's the world we live in. We have to understand that. So I think we have to sometimes be patient, wait for all the facts to come out. Sometimes they'll come out the next day. Sometimes, in this case, it took almost 2 months, or for at least a full month. We're getting close to 2 months now. So, that's just the reality, is that the media cannot be relied upon to tell you the truth. The media has a vested interest in lying to you, misrepresenting things to you, and they will assume what they want to assume. And what they want to assume is that people who voted for Trump are exactly what they told us they were. They spent all their time telling us that they were, it's the same thing as Brexit, right?
Mm-hmm.
Brexit people are bad too, right?
Yep.
And Trump supporters also bad.
Well, there you go. George,
that's why we're deplorable.
That's why we're deplorables. Hey, we've got to thank Hillary Clinton for that. That was brilliant. You know how they talk about things out of the mouth, truth coming out of the mouths of babes. What that shows is their disrespect and how they hold us in such low regard. Low regard. Hey, George, let's go to break now. You are listening to the Conservative Commandos radio show with George Landreth and Rick Trader. And we're coming to you from the studios of the Conservative Commandos radio network. At least it is between 12 and 6. Here at WNJC 1360 in Philadelphia and around the world on the internet with American Patriots Broadcasting, TalkStream Live, SHR Media, K98 Talk, iHeartRadio, AM, FM 24/7. We got a couple of great guests lined up for you today. On the other side, George and I will talk about them and introduce them. We'll be right back.
I really don't care. That's my prerogative. They say I'm nasty, but I...
The Conservative Commandos radio show is expanding to become the Conservative Commandos radio network. We are establishing a front line of conservative radio broadcasters and ironclad patriots to declare war against the madness of liberalism and the Obama administration. Are you tired of the disregard for our Constitution? Do you still have faith in the American dream? Are you looking for sensible, smart radio? If so, listen to the Conservative Commandos radio network every weekday from 11 a.m. to 7 p.m. and Saturdays from 2 to 6 p.m. on WNJC Radio, 1360 on your AM dial, or around the world on the internet at WNJCradio.com. Check out our website, CCRSnetwork.com, for rebroadcasts and network updates. We are the Conservative Commandos Radio Network, where now even more newsmakers go to be heard.
This is Pastor Christina Lamanier, chaplain for the INRA.
And I'm her husband, J.D. Manier. We help co-host on the Conservative Commandos radio show, and we want to sincerely thank our listeners who turned out to vote en masse to elect Donald Trump, Governor Mike Pence, and conservative congressional candidates across our nation.
Against incredible odds, you helped create the strongest GOP team to take the reins of power in Washington since the 1920s. General George Patton said, "It's the unconquerable soul of man, not the nature of the weapon he uses, that ensures victory." We salute all of you for taking a stand for truth, freedom, and defending our constitutional form of government. Let us continue to pray for our nation and for God's blessings. May God save the United States of America.
You can call the Conservative Commandos radio show at 856-227-1360. Your opinion counts at 856-227-1360.
This is Congressman Alan West, and you're listening to the Conservative Commando radio show.
You are listening to the Conservative Commandos radio show with George Landreth, President and CEO of Frontiers of Freedom. And I am Rick Trader. And for rebroadcasts of our shows, check out our websites, please. CCRshow.com or CCRSnetwork.com. Or at 8 a.m. Eastern, log on to Leading Edge Radio Network, or at 11 p.m., High Plains Talkradio.com. Or you can hear this show and all the shows that are part of the Conservative Commandos Network from your telephone by calling 832-999-1199. George, we have a couple of interesting guests on today with us.
We do. We've got at 4, or actually I guess 4:05, we've got Andrew Herod. He is a freelance researcher and writer. He's got a Ph.D. from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, and he's got a Juris Doctorate, a JD, which I also refer to. I have one of those, and I refer to it as a juvenile delinquency degree. But at any rate, he got that one from George Washington University. He's admitted to the bar in Virginia, and He's published a ton of articles on political, religious topics at a variety of different places. Places you'd recognize: Daily Caller, American Thinker, Washington Times, etc. He's also a fellow with the Lawfare Project, and that's an organization that's combating the misuse of human rights against Western societies. So he's going to be talking to us about ISIS, and he's written an interesting article in the American Thinker entitled ISIS, as Islamic as Anything. And he will, I think, be a good guest to talk about what's going on in Germany and, what it means to us here in America. Obviously, we care about the Germans as well. I don't mean to suggest we don't, but at the same time, the question is, what does this mean for us? What policy should we have in place? And maybe it's even too late. Do we already have people here that, sleeper cells and stuff? And it'll be interesting to talk to them. I think it should be a good conversation. And then at 4:30, we have Joe Messina. Now, Joe will be no stranger to our listeners here at the Conservative Commandos radio show, because he's heard on WNJC on Monday at 5 p.m. He's part of the Conservative Commandos radio network. And, of course, we broadcast in all over the country and around the globe. 38 different countries. I'm assuming that we're probably not available in North Korea on the internet, because I think in North Korea they would cut that off, because freedom and you have to be. You can only say nice things about Kim Jong-un in North Korea. But other than that, around the globe, of course, he began his radio career when he was asked to fill in for a host who had canceled on short notice. And so he grabbed himself a Republican and a Democrat and began a show and stirred things up. And he just likes to have a good conversation. He's a no-nonsense sort of person. So he has written a great article on why Merry Christmas is important. And he's also written a book humorously entitled Ramblings of a Right-Wing Bible-Thumping White Guy. You know what? I think that you could have written that. I could have written that.
Well, let me tell you a little bit about
I'm sure it wouldn't have been as good as his book, but I'm just saying,
Probably not.
Title would apply to either you or I.
I got his book, by the way, there, George. And by the way, just one slight correction to the bio that I furnished to you. Joe is now on 5 days a week here on the...
5 days a week.
5 days a week at 2 p.m. each and every day, or at least Monday through Friday. And I do have Joe's book that I have been reading. And what I like about his book, it's easy, fast reading. My kind of book. Makes a whole lot of common sense. And, George, let me tell you something a little bit about Joe Messina. In my opinion, radio commentary is one of the hardest things that anyone could do. And of those with aspirations of being the next Rush Limbaugh, most fail. But in my opinion, Joe is that rare exception who not only succeeds but excels. And also, in my opinion, no one is better than Joe Messina when it comes to radio commentary. That's why I'm so pleased to not only call Joe a friend, but have him as part of the Conservative Commandos radio network each and every day, or at least Monday through Friday.
Excellent. That's great. Well, I don't know if you've been, you look at your calendar. Today is the 22nd, so
it is.
Less than 2 months from today, we will have the last day of the Obama presidency.
Well, actually 1 month, George. Less than 1 month from today.
Yeah, what did I say?
2.
Oh,
I didn't want to scare our audience.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah. We probably half our audience could have just died of a heart attack.
Yes.
I really apologize to all of our listeners who are now, hooking themselves up to a defibrillator. Less than 1 month.
We've had enough. We've had enough of this guy in Washington.
Right. But I thought to myself, we should make this a holiday. It could be celebrating the end of an era.
I think you were right the first time. George, you were right the first time. The end of an era.
The end of an error.
Yes.
Or era. An error era.
It's more like
an
era.
Or maybe just a nightmare.
Can we go back? Can
nightmare.
You know, I love movies with the time machine premise, going back in time. Can we go back? Can we go back and change things?
Well,
I guess we can.
I do think that to those who kind of say, well, I think that Trump's an imperfect messenger, all I want to remind them of is John McCain was arguably, and it's certainly my way of thinking, an imperfect messenger. So was Mitt Romney. Can there be any doubt that both of them would have been a better alternative than Barack Obama? And so one of the things I like is that Morton Blackwell Leadership Institute teaches is don't let the good become the enemy of perfect. And I think that's what sometimes happens. We tend to eat our own sometimes. And like I said, I think you look at what's happened the last 8 years and ask yourself, did you have to have a perfect president to not have Barack Obama? Or could you have settled for an imperfect president? And would an imperfect president have been a huge increase in terms of, benefit to the country and, on foreign policy, on economics, Supreme Court justices, etc.? To me, the answer is very clear and very obvious. And it's time for people to stop the, I think so-and-so's the imperfect messenger. At some point, it's kind of like, you know what? The world has worked pretty well with good quality leaders that were imperfect. What it doesn't work well with is really, really bad quality leadership. And that's what we've had the last 8 years.
George, I wanted to ask you a personal question. When you talk about some people choosing not to vote for somebody like a Mitt Romney because he was an imperfect candidate, and as you so rightly say, there is no perfect candidate out there. There are some people, and this is a little bit going back a little bit of time, a lot of people chose not to vote for Mitt Romney simply because he was Mormon.
Yep.
And I know that you're a Mormon. And I just wanted to get your reflections of that.
Well,
like, I'm sure there are a lot of people that didn't vote for John Kennedy simply because he was a Catholic.
Exactly. I think, to me, I don't care what someone's religion is. For example, I'll give you an example of a Mormon I could never, ever in 1,000 years vote for and would never vote for. In fact, I attended a dinner where he showed up and he was applauded, and I didn't get out of my chair or clap. I sat there.
Could I take a guess?
Take a guess.
That Harry Reid guy?
You are exactly right.
Bingo.
Harry Reid. Yeah, so I was at a gathering. He showed up. I'm at a table. I was one of the sponsors of the event. He comes in, and he gets a big standing O. I obviously wasn't there for him. But the bottom line is, I did not even clap for him. I did not get out of my chair. I made it very clear. I hold him in the highest disdain possible. The fact that he's a Mormon doesn't make me like him. It doesn't moderate my disdain for him. If anything, it makes me even more hostile to him because I know he knows better. I know for a fact that he knows that he shouldn't be lying to us. He shouldn't be bearing false witness constantly, etc. I know that other religions teach that too, but I know that mine does. And I know that he doesn't keep those teachings. So to me, he's not only a liberal and a liar, but he's a hypocrite. Mm-hmm. So my point is, I don't view the world as if you're a Mormon, I like you. If you're not a Mormon, I don't. It's just, that's a silly way of seeing the world. I understood Mitt Romney's weak spots. I also was perfectly willing to vote for him when it came time to vote for him because Barack Obama was horrific and Mitt Romney was imperfect, but would have been a substantial improvement over Barack Obama. Mm-hmm. So I think it's unfortunate. We have to figure out how to solve that problem because we've lost too many elections as conservative movement because we spent too much time making imperfect people the enemy of the good, mm-hmm. and we don't need to do that.
We saw a lot of that this past campaign season, George. A lot of people were on that never Trump.
Right. That's right.
Donald Trump was not my choice. By far, he was not my choice. But once he got the nomination, I knew that he would be far better than Hillary Clinton. Our country would be far better having him as president than Hillary Clinton. But a lot of people want to die on the sword, George. It's almost like the South. I heard a theory about why the South lost the Civil War. And it was explained that the South died of a theory.
Yeah.
The South died of a theory of individual states' rights, something that the Civil War was actually being fought over. And that when Robert E. Lee surrendered at Appomattox, when his troops were threadbare, when they had very little ammunition, when they had no food, barely had enough scraps of clothing, there were 10,000 brand new Confederate uniforms that the state of South Carolina refused to give the Army of Northern Virginia because they were Virginia troops. They weren't South Carolina troops. So
right.
It's
well, I mean, exactly. You have this. That we have to be careful. I always want us to be principled conservatives, and I think it's important that we're principled. But at the same time, we've got to be careful.
All right, and with that, we'll go to our break, and you are listening to Conservative Commandos Radio Show with George Landreth and Rick Trader, coming to you live from the studios of the Conservative Commandos Radio Network here at WNJC 1360, our flagship station in Philadelphia, and around the world on the internet with American Patriots Broadcasting, TalkStream Live, SHR Media, K98 Talk, iHeartRadio, AM, FM 24/7. Don't go away. On the other side, we'll be speaking with Andrew Harrod about ISIS is Islamic as anything. George and I'll be right back.
I really don't care. That's my prerogative. They say I'm nasty, but
This is Rick Trader, host of the Conservative Commandos Radio Show.
And I'm John Forsyth, owner of WNJC Radio. Fellow patriots, the Conservative Commandos Radio Show is for conservatives, about conservatives, and by conservatives.
We are patriots who want to take our country back from the likes of Barack Obama, Harry Reid, George Soros, and Nancy Pelosi.
But we can't keep up this fight without your critical support today. Can you help? Please go to www.helpccrs.com right now and make a donation by credit card or PayPal. That's www.helpccrs.com.
Our goal is to expose the liberal agenda and distortions. We are fighting to spread the truth about political issues, political leaders, and conservative issues and values.
Our hosts are not paid. In fact, we buy our own airtime, studio time, and pay our own expenses.
We created the show because we are trying to make a difference. So can you help the CCRS expose the truth in 2014 and beyond? Go to www.helpccrs.com.
Help keep the Conservative Commandos Radio Show on the air by going to www.helpccrs.com and make a donation today to return our country to the conservative roots created by our founding fathers.
This is Pastor Christina Lamanier, chaplain for the INRA.
And I'm her husband, J.D. Manier. We help co-host on the Conservative Commandos Radio Show, and we want to sincerely thank our listeners who turned out to vote en masse to elect Donald Trump, Governor Mike Pence, and conservative congressional candidates across our nation.
Against incredible odds, you helped create the strongest GOP team to take the reins of power in Washington since the 1920s. General George Patton said, "It's the unconquerable soul of man, not the nature of the weapon he uses, that ensures victory." We salute all of you for taking a stand for truth, freedom, and defending our constitutional form of government. Let us continue to pray for our nation and for God's blessings. May God save the United States of America.
What does it take to be the leader in production systems technology? To be the one company that solves production problems at any plant, for any product, and with any technology? It takes a 30-year record of success. It takes total mastery of complex technologies with a history of delivering success every time, without fail. Only one company can claim that high ground in manufacturing line optimization, data automation, and systems integration, and that's Philadelphia Control Systems. In factories worldwide, Philadelphia Control Systems programs, software, and engineering solutions deliver optimal performance and output flow with a record that can't be matched. Any plant, any product, any technology. Philadelphia Control Systems, the leader in production automation since 1982. 800-335-9811. PCS4automation.com. That's PCS, the number 4, automation.com.
The Conservative Commandos radio show is expanding to become the Conservative Commandos Radio Network. We're establishing a front line of conservative radio broadcasters and ironclad patriots to declare war against the madness of liberalism and the Obama administration. Are you tired, as I am, about the disregard for our Constitution? Do you still have faith in the American dream? Are you looking for sensible, smart radio? If so, listen to the Conservative Commandos Radio Network every weekday from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. on WNJC Radio 1360 a.m. or around the world on the internet at WNJCradio.com. Check out our websites, ConservativeCommandosRadioNetwork.com and CCRN.com for rebroadcasts and network updates. We are the Conservative Commandos Radio Network, where even more newsmakers go to be heard. From the East Coast to the West Coast and around the world on the internet, we're coming to you live from the CCRS studios, WNJC 1360. This is the Conservative Commandos radio show with your host, Rick Trader. The Conservative Commandos radio show, where the newsmakers go to be heard.
Businessman there, drink my wine.
You can call the Conservative Commandos radio show at 856-227-1360. Your opinion counts at 856-227-1360.
This is Congressman Alan West, and you're listening to the Conservative Commando Radio Show.
Greetings, fellow deplorables. George Landreth and Rick Trader. If you would like to hear a rebroadcast of today's Conservative Commandos, you can always check out our websites, ccrsnetwork.com and ccrshow.com. At noon, you can log on to roarradio.net. At 11 p.m., you can log on to highplainsdailynews.com. And with this phone number and a phone, you don't even need a radio or the internet to listen. Just this number and a phone. 832-999-1199. We have our guest with us, Andrew E. Herod. He is a freelance researcher and writer. He's earned a Ph.D. from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy and a J.D., Juris Doctorate, from the George Washington University Law School. He is admitted to practice law in the state of Virginia. He has published over 250 articles on a variety of topics, political, religious, you name it, at places like the American Thinker, Daily Caller, Front Page Magazine, Faith Freedom International, Religious Freedom Coalition, Washington Times, and World Magazine, as well as others. He is a fellow with the Lawfare Project, which is an organization that combats the misuse of human rights against Western societies. Andrew, welcome back to the Conservative Commandos radio show.
Oh, it's always great to be here, George. Thank you.
Well, you've written an interesting article. We teased it a little earlier in the show. It's entitled Academic. ISIS is as Islamic as anything. So, we've got a lot going on in the world today. We've got the Christmas attack in in Germany, we've got ISIS taking responsibility or taking credit, however you want to phrase that. We've got the Germans rethinking their plans in terms of what they're doing with folks that claim to be, in need of escaping to Germany. And then you've got a president-elect in the United States that said, we're not going to make that same mistake. How do you see all this?
Well, ISIS is clearly is clearly an ongoing global phenomenon of the global jihad, and simply we're just seeing simply a continuation of further attacks in Berlin and Paris, Nice before, simply a succession. Is going to continue until the organization is debilitated and destroyed, certainly in its land base, but even then, of course, most analysts predict it will go underground into an Al-Qaeda model, and the jihad will continue on that in that manner from ISIS as well as other groups like Al-Qaeda.
Fair enough. Now, you have ISIS. One of the first I stands for Islamic, and yet you have people who constantly argue that it's not Islamic. What's the point? What are they getting at?
Well, the article noted a presentation at Georgetown University by Ovimir Anjum, a professor at the University of Toledo in Ohio, and he gave an analysis of the place of ISIS within Islamic law, Islamic theology. And the ultimate conclusion of the article or presentation showed that you couldn't really dismiss ISIS as being simply outside of the pale of Islam. He made the argument that within Islamic law, it's very easy for someone like himself to say, I disagree with that. I disagree with what ISIS is doing. But it's very hard to completely say, no, there's just no basis, no legitimacy for that group, that phenomenon within Islam. That he himself noted that ISIS often quotes Quranic verses, the hadith narratives of the canonical hadith narratives of the life of Islam's Prophet Muhammad, and knew these texts rather well, although he said they might give a somewhat strained interpretation or minority opinion on them. But he noted that it's very hard to sort of, within Islam, say a group like ISIS just simply has no legitimacy. And indeed, in his presentation, noted to groups in the past that had similarities with ISIS, like the 12th century Almohads, who were a Berber tribe that came out of North Africa and then conquered the existing Islamic societies in the Iberian Peninsula that had initially taken rule there, and then established a much harsher rule within Spain and the Iberian Peninsula. He made analogies. He suggested, of course, many people have compared ISIS to the Saudi forebears, the Wahhabis Saudi forebears of Saudi Arabia, the modern kingdom, and how there's analogies between the behavior of the Wahhabis in 18th century Saudi Arabia in sort of a formative period of what became today the kingdom, and what ISIS does. So he gave a rather disturbing presentation that things like ISIS, as he said, sort of come and go in Islamic history and simply sort of recur and can indeed draw upon certain Islamic canons.
Interesting. So when someone tries to spend time telling you, I think this is true for almost anybody. I know some folks who are Muslim, and they are red-blooded Americans who are willing to condemn jihad without any problem, without explanation, without qualifiers. They're concerned about anti-Semitism. And my suspicion is that ISIS would consider them not good Muslims. But yet, when the president says, ISIS isn't really Muslim, is he trying to say that he knows a Muslim who's a good guy and ISIS isn't like the good guys? This is just a weird argument to say that ISIS, has Islamic in their name, isn't actually Islamic.
Well, indeed, and coming from someone like, say, President Barack Obama, that raises a question of what does any sort of outsider of a community like Obama or myself, what authority do I have to pronounce upon someone else in another community to say that you have no canonical authoritative basis in that community? And indeed, as this presentation noted in this American Thinker article, indicated at Georgetown University. He made the professor Anja made the reference to a discursive community in Islam, that it's sort of like, maybe you can think of like a legal system, or sort of there are arguments over different legal standards, different court precedents. If you think of the American legal system, of arguments over Supreme Court decisions and so forth, and people might go back and forth. And so he was making the point that there simply is a basis for ISIS, and indeed ISIS is, as indicated before, is perhaps not that much different from, say, the theology predominant underpinning the Saudi kingdom in Saudi Arabia, the Wahhabist strain of Islam, that is saying that ISIS is perhaps a more sort of just simply a cousin of this kind of theology. Indeed, I've heard from other presentations of people like Michael Nazir, a Pakistani British bishop in the Church of England, a convert from Pakistan to Christianity in the United Kingdom, who has discussed how he's analyzed groups like the Muslim Brotherhood or their sort of similar, the Deobandi movement in the South Asian continent, in India and Pakistan. He said, well, some of those people, they might advocate for Islamic rule, Sharia, and so forth, but they might say, at least at the moment, that we're not going to use violence. But then he made the point that people he seems to observe a tendency that people can gravitate from such groups like the Muslim Brotherhood to something much more violent, like, say, ISIS, which, indeed, if you think of the recent attack on Coptic Christians in the church in Egypt, you're seeing more of violence from a Muslim Brotherhood that people always talk about. Oh, well, recently, at least tactically, they had forsworn violence, and more people there, say, going to ISIS groups. So there's more of a kind of a shifting across a spectrum of related theological, legal, Islamic legal views. You can have movement along a spectrum.
Fair enough. So part of the message here is that there's not, that while there may be some disagreement, not every person who's a Muslim necessarily agrees with ISIS, but you can't use that as a basis to argue that ISIS isn't Islamic.
Yeah, I mean, indeed, he made other points not mentioned in the article, but in the presentation, which you can view online, he made other arguments about how, for example, today there's great debate about whether or not a constitutional democratic nation state has any sort of legal authority within Islamic canon. So that's another issue similar to what ISIS or other groups are doing in their authoritarian, repressive, very brutal rule. Or he made arguments about there's been discussion about slavery in Islam and Islamic law, and he made some arguments that there's dispute among theologians today of whether slavery should be a ban for all time, or whether it's something that should merely be banned under current conditions. So there is indeed various troubling wiggle room over a lot of human rights issues and rules of good governance, liberty under law, and so forth, of having a regime that respects individual human dignity.
Interesting. We are up getting up against a break here, and I wanted to see, can we hold you over for the next session?
Sure. Excellent.
Then we will be back momentarily with Andrew Herod and more on the question of ISIS, and perhaps we can talk a little bit more when we come back on the whole question of what would be some policies that can help protect America from these risks. But in the meantime, you think about that, get our listeners thinking about that. We are coming to you live from the Conservative Commandos Radio Network Studios, WNJC 1360. That's our flagship station in Philadelphia. And of course, if you're not in Philadelphia, then you're probably listening in with the rest of the population in the world, other than, as I mentioned, maybe North Korea, on the internet with American Patriots Broadcasting, TalkStream Live, SHR Media, K98 Talk, iHeartRadio, and AM FM 24/7. Don't go away. Rick and I and Andrew will be right back.
They say I'm crazy. I really don't care. That's my prerogative. They say I'm nasty, but I...
The Conservative Commandos radio show is expanding to become the Conservative Commandos radio network. We are establishing a front line of conservative radio broadcasters and ironclad patriots to declare war against the madness of liberalism and the Obama administration. Are you tired of the disregard for our Constitution? Do you still have faith in the American dream? Are you looking for sensible, smart radio? If so, listen to the Conservative Commandos radio network every weekday from 11 a.m. to 7 p.m. and Saturdays from 2 to 6 p.m. on WNJC Radio, 1360 on your AM dial, or around the world on the internet at WNJCradio.com. Check out our website, ccrsnetwork.com, for rebroadcasts and network updates. We are the Conservative Commandos Radio Network, where now even more newsmakers go to be heard.
This is Pastor Christina Lamanier, chaplain for the INRA.
And I'm her husband, J.D. Manier. We help co-host on the Conservative Commandos radio show, and we want to sincerely thank our listeners who turned out to vote in mass to elect Donald Trump, Governor Mike Pence, and conservative congressional candidates across our nation.
Against incredible odds, you helped create the strongest GOP team to take the reins of power in Washington since the 1920s. General George Patton said, "It's the unconquerable soul of man, not the nature of the weapon he uses, that ensures victory." We salute all of you for taking a stand for truth, freedom, and defending our constitutional form of government. Let us continue to pray for our nation and for God's blessings. May God save the United States of America.
You can call the Conservative Commandos radio show at 856-227-1360. Your opinion counts at 856-227-1360.
This is Congressman Alan West, and you're listening to the Conservative Commando Radio Show.
Welcome back, fellow deplorables. This is George Landreth with the original Conservative Commando, Rick Trader, and our special guest, Aaron Herod. If you would like to hear a rebroadcast of today's show, please check out our website, ccrsnetwork.com, ccrshow.com. You can always log in to roarradio.net. At noon each day, you can get the previous programming. At 11 p.m., you can log on to highplainsdailynews.com. And, of course, you can always listen to us with your phone and this number. The Conservative Commandos are everywhere. That's 832-999-1199. So you don't even need a computer on the internet, and you don't even need a radio. All you need is a phone and that number. At any rate, we have been talking with Andrew Herod. He is a writer, researcher. He's got a Ph.D. from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, a J.D. from George Washington University. He's also a prolific writer, writes for a number of publications, and he's involved with the Lawfare Project, which deals with and trying to combat the misuse of human rights against Western states, which I think is an interesting point. In fact, maybe you can tie that into what we're talking about. But I've read some interviews, and one of the things that they said was that the left, actually not the left, I guess in this case, but the ISIS and the terrorists, they tend to think of these human rights that we have as things that make their job easier, and they consider them something that they can use and manipulate to make it easier to infiltrate and to do damage to us. And that I'm a big fan of human rights, and I'm a big fan of constitutional rights, but I do understand how if you have people who are quite frankly hell-bent on destroying you, that they could use those things to their advantage. And so it sounds like you do some work to try to keep that from happening.
Well, indeed, that was precisely a theme that came up in another recent article of mine at another website, the Religious Freedom Coalition, dealing with a presentation by James Mitchell, the former CIA interrogator at Guantanamo and elsewhere with various jihadists from mainly Al-Qaeda, and gave a presentation at the American Enterprise Institute. But he talked about how the various jihadists with whom he had dealt and interviewed and interrogated, they indicated that they saw sort of a Western society, American society, is very sort of soft and had all these things like civil rights and so forth, and they consider that sort of weaknesses that they could exploit, and that indeed that were things that were sort of maybe from a divine plan to advance Islam that had made the enemies of Islam weaker, that showed how the weakness of a non-Islamic society vis-a-vis the true faith of Islam, and they would indeed try to exploit those kinds of things. He talked about functioning in a free society, particularly with sort of politically correct kind of mantras, thinking that acted as sort of like a cloaking device that people could operate in sort of plain sight. And he discussed how Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, of course, considered sort of the technical mastermind behind the September 11th, 2001 attacks of Al-Qaeda. He'd become very fascinated with sort of pinprick attacks, small-scale attacks, like, say, particularly the Beltway sniper several years ago, back in 2002, killed some 17 individuals in the Washington, D.C. area. And he became very sort of fascinated with something like that. He thought that, well, if you could just keep up sort of a string of kind of attritional attacks like that, keep making sort of bombing, shootings, other attacks, then you would really wear down a society. His thinking was that, well, something like September 11th, it's very spectacular and so forth, but it's very hard to pull something like that off, and that really the main emphasis should be on precisely a kind of constantly wearing down, terrorizing a society. And therefore, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, James Mitchell had discussed, had been fascinated with things like he bought a gas station in Pakistan so that he could experiment with his engineering background with the idea of trying to build bombs that you could get into the gas tanks of gas stations, and then you could. He was trying to work on the detonating system. Then you could explode those. You could use that then in gas stations all up and down the East Coast of America and have explosions all over the place. So, and then, precisely as strategists of terror advocate, then you really debilitate a society. That other jihadists, Abu Zubaydah, for example, with whom Mitchell had spoken and interrogated, they said that the real battlefield is not so much of trying to defeat the American military or so forth, but it is indeed this mental battlefield in the mind of trying to debilitate the will of your Western American opponent.
Interesting. Now, a quick question, because I think some of our listeners may be curious. I'm always trying to figure out, I don't always agree with the policies of other countries, but I don't really have any great desire, because of that disagreement, to kill them all, to be honest with you. I don't really, I think most Americans are puzzled. Why is it that folks, that these terrorist groups, whether it's Al-Qaeda or whether it's ISIS, Muslim Brotherhood, whatever, what is it that makes them want to destroy America? Why aren't they just happy kind of going on doing things in their backyard the way they want to do them? If I want to have a barbecue in my backyard, I don't feel the need to kill all my neighbors because they're not barbecuing with me.
Well, indeed, so as Mitchell himself at precisely this presentation had indicated on the basis of his recent book, he said in interrogating these jihadists, their view precisely was, you might not have a war with Islam, but Islam has a war with you. I, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, or another jihadist, I have a war with you because according to this Islamic belief system, I must impose Islamic dominance on the world. I must impose the rule of Islam, Islamic law, this divine mandate to ultimately institute this Islamic society all around the world in which you'll either become a Muslim yourself or you'll at least be subordinate to Islam. And then in particular, their issues of what arise in the Islamic thinking of a defensive jihad. They're sort of seen as reverses of Islam that need to be corrected, where you have lands that were once Muslim or areas that should be part of this world of Islam that are suffering under non-Islamic intrusions. I mean, the existence of Israel, for example, is this non-Muslim state that was created on land that was considered part of this conquered by Islam. Once a land is conquered by Islamic authority, it should not be given up. And Israel, of course, was settled, revived Jewish nation there, and was considered Islamic land. Or the intrusion of, say, non-Islamic forces in the Arabian Peninsula with American troops stationed there after the Gulf War. I mean, one of the things Osama bin Laden cited for the 9/11 attacks, that you have this large non-Islamic presence in this Islamic world, or now with American troops in Afghanistan or American involvement in Iraq and so forth. That that then gives rise to what's considered a justification for a defensive jihad, that you're simply not supposed to have that non-Islamic presence, that development of any sort of non-Islamic rule in those areas, and so we have to now fight back and stop that.
Interesting. So it's just like you said. So the fact that we say we don't have a war with them is not really in any way mollify them. Their answer is, "I've got one with you."
Yeah, indeed. Michael Mukasey, a former attorney general, once said at a CPAC at this event in 2013 at CPAC, put on by Breitbart publication, Breitbart website, the Uninvited panel. He made this paraphrase of Leon Trotsky. You might not be interested in the revolution, but the revolution is interested in you. You might not be interested in the Muslim Brotherhood or jihad, but it's interested in you. I mean, it's a similar sort of analysis that if you have an ideology of communism that believes that the utopia of man, the good society will come precisely with the triumph of a communist, a Marxist ideology. Well, even if you don't believe in that or you don't take it seriously, they're going to come after you. They're going to seek to implement that worldview, that belief system.
Interesting. So, before that break, we've only got actually probably about a minute before we're going to have to. So maybe in 1 minute you can give us some ideas of things that would be policies that we should be looking for out of Washington if they take seriously the need to protect America from the sort of thing that you see going on in Germany right now.
Well, of course, there's obviously on the ground in the Middle East there are issues of completing a successful military campaign against ISIS, but that in turn then brings up the question of you need to, as many others have said in Washington, D.C. and elsewhere, establish some sort of stable political order among the populations of that region such that you don't have a reversion to any sort of ISIS group coming back. And then also in dealing with what we're seeing in Berlin and all these other attacks, I think we need to be more critically scrutinize the kind of Islamic immigration and groups that are coming into our societies. I think we should have once again, as has been suggested by Daniel Pipes, for example, the Middle East Forum, an ideological screening for people coming in this country as existed during the Cold War, but then went into abeyance in the 1990s after the Cold War, asking people questions about what do they think about a free society, do they support any of these tenets of Sharia, jihad, do they accept free speech, freedom of religion, and so forth, and more scrutinize immigration. Other ways say, not accept people from countries that are hotbeds of terrorism, maybe just reduce immigration in general, simply because you can make a case for a kind of geopolitical profiling of Islamic immigration, that there are all sorts of risk factors, as precisely as becoming a larger theme in Europe itself, in Germany, with this massive influx of refugees that wasn't really well advised, an issue in France, or, of course, with Geert Wilders in Holland. This is another issue that he stresses greatly, that you have to really critique of how much risk are you importing when you bring in such a population that comes from a background that does indeed contain such hostile doctrines and can indeed be long-term threat. So I think that's another factor that has to be looked at.
Oh, very good. I appreciate that. That's a good answer. We are up against the clock, so we've got to run. We really appreciate having you on, Andrew. Are you on Twitter?
Yes, you can follow me at A. Herod on Twitter. Yes, indeed.
Excellent. Very good. Hope our listeners will do that. We're coming to you live from the Conservative Commandos Radio Network studios, WNJC 1360, our flagship station in Philadelphia, and around the world on the Internet with American Patriots Broadcasting, TalkStream Live, SHR Media, K90A Talk, iHeartRadio, and AMFM 24/7. Don't go away. Rick and I'll be right back.
Oh, great to be here. Thank
They say I'm crazy, I really don't care. That's my prerogative. They say I'm nasty, but I...
The Conservative Commandos radio show is expanding. to become the Conservative Commandos Radio Network. We are establishing a front line of conservative radio broadcasters and ironclad patriots to declare war against the madness of liberalism and the Obama administration. Are you tired of the disregard for our Constitution? Do you still have faith in the American dream? Are you looking for sensible, smart radio? If so, listen to the Conservative Commandos Radio Network every weekday from 11 a.m. to 7 p.m. and Saturdays from 2 to 6 p.m. on WNJC Radio, 1360 on your AM dial, or around the world on the internet at WNJCradio.com. Check out our website, CCRSnetwork.com, for rebroadcasts and network updates. We are the Conservative Commandos Radio Network, where now even more newsmakers go to be heard.
This is Pastor Christina Lamanier, chaplain for the INRA.
And I'm her husband, J.D. Manier. We help co-host on the Conservative Commandos radio show, and we want to sincerely thank our listeners who turned out to vote in mass to elect Donald Trump, Governor Mike Pence, and conservative congressional candidates across our nation.
Against incredible odds, you helped create the strongest GOP team to take the reins of power in Washington since the 1920s. General George Patton said, "It's the unconquerable soul of man, not the nature of the weapon he uses, that ensures victory." We salute all of you for taking a stand for truth, freedom, and defending our constitutional form of government. Let us continue to pray for our nation and for God's blessings. May God save the United States of America.
You can call the Conservative Commandos Radio Show at 856-227-1360. Your opinion counts at 856-227-1360.
This is Congressman Alan West, and you're listening to the Conservative Commando Radio Show.
Greetings, friends. Rick Trader and I are back. I'm George Landreth, and of course, Rick Trader, the original Conservative Commando. You're listening to Conservative Commandos. If you would like to hear our rebroadcast of today's show, please check out our website, CCRSnetwork.com and CCRshow.com. At noon, you can log on to roarradio.net, and at 11 p.m., you can log on to highplainsdailynews.com. And with this number and your phone, you can always listen to the Conservative Commandos, 832-999-1199. We like to give you no excuse for not listening. We are really glad to have with us Joe Messina. He is the host of the Real Side radio show. You who are regulars at the Conservative Commandos Radio Network here on WNJC, I have heard him throughout the week at the 2 o'clock hour. He is, of course, part of the Conservative Commandos Radio Network, and we are broadcast all over the United States and all over the globe on the Internet as well, with the possible exception of maybe Iran and North Korea. But aside from that, if you are anywhere and you are anyone, you are listening to Joe Messina. He began his radio career when he was asked to fill in for a host who had canceled on short notice. And being someone who was interested in creating a little bit of a stir, he grabbed a Democrat and a Republican and began stirring some things up, and with what I would call a no-nonsense conservative realism. At any rate, Joe is interested in hearing both sides of issues, but he certainly understands that there is a right side, as his book and his show demonstrate. He's not afraid to take on taboo subjects, and he likes to discuss real issues and get real answers. Everything from race, religion, racism, politics, they are all available for Joe to talk about, and he enjoys it. He's also written a book, Ramblings of a Right-Wing, Bible-Thumping White Guy. I thought to myself and commented earlier, this is a great title. I mean, I could have written a book by that title. Well, those things apply to me too, but Joe got to it first. Joe, welcome back to the Conservative Commandos radio program.
Thanks for having me. I don't know if I want to compete with that intro, though. I mean, my God, it makes me sound like I'm 99 doing all that stuff.
Oh no, you've been a child prodigy. You started when you were 3.
Yeah, there you go. I like you.
Well, so you have written a really good article. Why Christmas? Why Merry Christmas, not just Happy Holidays? And I think it's a good point. One thing I noticed when I served on a school board was there was this real. They didn't want to call it Christmas holiday. It was the winter holiday. They didn't want to call it Easter. It was the spring holiday. They wanted very much to strip away anything that had a religious connotation. And I see this as, you're fighting against that trend, as it were. So tell us, what's the argument here?
Well, let me go back just a little bit and say to you, I'm on a school board also in California. Pretty large, kids, student population, and it's a constant fight on anything that might smell religious. They want to can everything. So my argument, though, in the article is, why do we want to dumb down Christmas? Why do we have to have happy holidays? Because when you actually look at the months and you look at the holidays, February has more holidays than December has. And I actually joke and say, can you imagine taking your honey out, and if you follow the logic of the left, take your honey out, give her that piece of jewelry, take her for a nice dinner, and look at her and say, "Happy holidays, honey," because that would be the politically correct thing to do. Now, you may sleep on the couch that night, but at least you'd be politically correct. And it's the same thing with Christmas. If you really think about the origin of Christmas in this country, you can't call this holiday anything else but Merry Christmas. And since the left wants to, tie the tree, and they want to tie Santa Claus, and I don't know, Frosty the Snowman and the rest of them, they somehow want to tie all this stuff together, as you know from being on the school board, as to religious icons, then what else could it be than Christmas? And frankly, to truly take on the religious aspect of it, it is about the birth of Christ. It is about the true gift that God gave us. So to try to make it anything else but, and to make fun of us with a Festivus celebration, or anything along those lines, and frankly, the Jewish holiday, Hanukkah, doesn't always overlap with Christmas. So I think it's very good to tell your Jewish friends Happy Hanukkah, and tell your Christian friends and even others Merry Christmas. There are plenty of people that aren't Christians that are not offended by the word Christmas. Correct?
Oh, I agree. I mean, one of the weird things about this is when you say Merry Christmas to somebody, you're not saying you must practice Christianity as I see fit or anything like that. It's right. And when my Jewish friend says Happy Hanukkah, all they're doing is sharing their goodwill and the warm feelings that they have at that time of year about a holiday that's important to them. Right. They're not suggesting anything other than that. So it would be like saying to somebody, "Hey, life is good. I'm happy. I hope your life is good and you're happy too." And then someone going, "I'm upset by that. How dare he say that?" It's kind of weird.
Yeah, but I have a lot of Jewish friends. I grew up. My mother had a lot of Jewish friends, so we hung out together and what have you. I've got a lot of Jewish friends here in California. I haven't had one tell me, and they know me. They know my person. I go, look, I'm just curious. Do you guys, does your family get offended when somebody who doesn't know you wishes you a Merry Christmas? None of them. Not a one of them said, yeah, you know what, I'm a little taken back when that happens. Most of them will say, look, I understand the greeting. I understand the spirit in which it was meant, so I take it like that. I don't read anything into it. When somebody's wishing, look, if I wish a Jewish guy Merry Christmas because I don't know him, and I'm not doing that saying, hey, he looks Jewish, let me see if I can poke at him. Because I have had a couple of people turn around and say, you know what, I hope you have a great Christmas. I'm Jewish. I don't celebrate Christmas. And I immediately say, well, then you know what? You have a great Hanukkah. I hope you enjoy your Hanukkah.
Right.
And leave it at that. And it changes the body language, the facial expression, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense to me because I think you're exactly right about that. There's something fairly simple and rational about, and we're so sensitive nowadays on these topics, but like I said earlier, to me, when you say Merry Christmas or you call something the Christmas holiday, that doesn't mean that if you're Jewish, you don't get out of school too. But it is, in fact, since the vast majority of the population is Christian, at least on some level. That doesn't mean everyone's a church-going Christian, but they're culturally Christian. Right. And they have a Christmas tree at their house and so forth. The vast majority of Americans are. So you call it what you want to. I mean, you call it by what the majority calls it. You don't. Anyhow, it strikes me.
I hear you. Listen,
we're getting crazy.
But we've given this stuff up. You're on a school board. Like I said, I am too. And about 4 or 5 years ago, somebody complained about the Jesus songs at the Christmas events. And I got a hold of somebody from the Pacific Justice Institute. He sent me over a copy of the Supreme Court ruling that said Christmas songs referring to God, referring to Jesus, referring to the birth of the Savior are historical, they're traditional, and they're perfectly acceptable as long as children aren't forced to participate. So I was able to squelch that by giving that to every principal at the high schools, and I gave it to my superintendent. I said, I don't want to hear about this stuff. It's legal, right, and it's okay. And we have 21,000 students. You got 4 parents that complained. I'm sorry, they're outranked.
Yeah, I mean, there are people who think it's offensive to discuss the American Revolution because for whatever reason, maybe they used to live in England, and they find the whole subject matter troubling. I don't care. Tough luck. And so if we spend all our time trying to figure out how to pacify everybody who might be offended by something that's actually not offensive, I understand offensive stuff. I've seen people who are offensive, and it's obvious, but we get offended by way too much stuff nowadays. Hey, Joe, we got to take a break real quick. Can we? Okay. Will you stick through this with the break? Because I know we want to come back and talk about your book.
All right, that's perfect.
Excellent, great. I appreciate it. Just want to remind our listeners that we're coming to you live from the Conservative Commandos Radio Network studios, WNJC 1360, which is our flagship station in Philadelphia. And of course, we're coming to you from around the world on the internet with American Patriots Broadcasting, TalkStream Live, SHR Media, K98 Talk, iHeartRadio, and AM/FM 24/7. Don't go away. Rick and I and Joe will be right back.
They say I'm crazy, I really don't care. That's my prerogative. They say I'm nasty, but I
The Conservative Commandos radio show is expanding to become the Conservative Commandos Radio Network. We are establishing a front line of conservative radio broadcasters and ironclad patriots to declare war against the madness of liberalism and the Obama administration. Are you tired of the disregard for our Constitution? Do you still have faith in the American dream? Are you looking for sensible, smart radio? If so, listen to the Conservative Commandos Radio Network every weekday from 11 a.m. to 7 p.m. and Saturdays from 2 to 6 p.m. on WNJC Radio, 1360 on your AM dial, or around the world on the internet at WNJCradio.com. Check out our website, ccrsnetwork.com, for rebroadcasts and network updates. We are the Conservative Commandos Radio Network, where now even more newsmakers go to be heard.
This is Pastor Christina Lamanier, chaplain for the INRA.
And I'm her husband, J.D. Manier. We help co-host on the Conservative Commandos radio show, and we want to sincerely thank our listeners who turned out to vote in mass to elect Donald Trump, Governor Mike Pence, and conservative congressional candidates across our nation.
Against incredible odds, you helped create the strongest GOP team to take the reins of power in Washington since the 1920s. General George Patton said, "It's the unconquerable soul of man, not the nature of the weapon he uses, that ensures victory." We salute all of you for taking a stand for truth, freedom, and defending our constitutional form of government. Let us continue to pray for our nation and for God's blessings. May God save the United States of America.
You can call the Conservative Commandos radio show at 856-227-1360. Your opinion counts at 856-227-1360.
This is Congressman Alan West, and you're listening to the Conservative Commando radio show.
Welcome back to the Conservative Commandos radio show with George Landreth, President and CEO of Frontiers of Freedom, and I'm just Rick Trader. I don't have a title here. But if you'd like to hear rebroadcasts of our shows, please check out our websites, ccrshow.com or ccrsnetwork.com. Or at 8 a.m. Eastern, log on to leadingedgeradionetwork.com or at 11 p.m. High Plains talkradio.com. Or you can hear this show and all the shows like The Real Side with Joe Messina. You can hear those shows from your telephone at any time by calling 832-999-1199. Our guest this segment is Joe Messina. He is the host of The Real Side, which is heard here on WNJC 1360 as part of the Conservative Commandos radio network each and every day, or at least Monday through Friday from 2 to 3 p.m. Joe, thanks for holding through that break. We appreciate your time.
Always a pleasure to be on with you, Rick.
Oh, Joe. And, Joe, I want to read this to you. Radio commentary is one of the hardest things anyone can try to do. Of those with aspirations of being the next Rush Limbaugh, most fail. Joe Messina is that rare exception who not only exceeds but excels. In my opinion, no one is better than Joe Messina. Joe has the uncanny way to explain the most complicated issue, and he does it with pure common sense. Joe Messina is by far my favorite radio commentator. I always learn, see things in a new way, think of things differently whenever I listen to his wisdom. Joe Messina, how much did you pay that guy?
You know...
How much did you pay that guy to put that on your book?
I post all kinds of stuff from nut jobs around the world. I don't. No, that was your Rick Trader put that up there. I you know what? I hope he hasn't cashed the check yet because I don't think it'll be there. But you always make me blush, Rick. I got to tell you, and I'm pretty thick-skinned, but you always make me blush. Because I really think that you're not a. I hate to put it this way, but you're not a butt kisser. You're a real guy, and you really call things as they are. So it means a lot to me that you wrote that.
Well, thank you, Joe. And by the way, I'll tell you another little story. Tell you and our listeners another little story. When I was planning to put together this thing called the Conservative Commandos Radio Network here at WNJC 1360, I was talking with a lot of people, including you, at CPAC. You might remember about joining us.
Oh, yeah? Yep.
And I was having this conversation with my wife, and we're driving back from Delaware, and we were picking up WNJC 1360. It was a Saturday afternoon, and we're listening to the radio, and we were listening to your show. And your wife, my wife said to me, "Hey, this guy is great. You need to get him in your lineup." And I said, well, that's Joe Messina, and he's actually in our lineup. So there you go.
Oh, I appreciate that. You're making me smile a lot.
And, Joe, you got this...
My Christmas, Rick.
What's that?
I said you're making my Christmas.
Well, you made my Christmas. I got a gift early. It was your book, Ramblings of a Right-Wing, Bible-Thumping White Guy, and I said that title better than you do when you say it on your show.
No, I don't think anybody ever believes I wrote the book because I could never get it to roll off my tongue.
Yeah. Well, you and George were having this conversation earlier about Christmas, and my thinking is why can't these liberals just ignore Christmas? Like there's certain holidays I'm not a part of that I frankly am not. Ignore, not out of ignorance, but just I'm not a part of them, like Hanukkah or Ramadan or whatever else. I'm sure there are a million holidays out there that I don't celebrate. But, Joe, I was thinking about what is behind all their righteous indignation, but it kind of fits in with one of your chapters in your book entitled nowhere on religion, and you're asking that question. So do you want to tie these two ideas together, Joe?
Well, look at here's we've gotten to the point. It's really funny. I was thinking about this morning. My wife and I were talking about this ongoing nastiness, the whole election, and I said, we've forgotten who we are. We're Americans first, who happen to be Republicans and Democrats, but we're Americans first. Mm-hmm. It's the same thing when it comes to religion. We've come to this place in this country where you can't have a religious belief. You cannot have religious foundation, because then what happens in most religions, especially the Judeo-Christian religion, you have can I swear on your show? Can I say right and wrong, good and evil?
Yes, you can. You can use those words as long as it's not one of the 7 deadly words made famous by George Carlin as referring to the FCC. You can say them. You can't say them. But
so when you have religious conviction, when you believe in a God, a higher power, somebody more important than yourself, then you have right and wrong. So you have good and bad, good and evil, and what have you. So I think we've also forgotten that. We're very flippant with saying we're a Christian, or we believe in God, or we believe in a higher power. We don't really live it out anymore, because look at the world around us. There are no more boys and girls. There is no more right or wrong. What is it? Goodness is relative to who you are. Morality is relative to who you are, not to the greater good. And I think that's exactly what has happened here. We've gone down that road where any mention of religion, any thought that there's a God, makes people nervous and uncomfortable. And I don't know why. The government, however, has no problem stepping in and filling that void. They'll be your sufficiency. They'll make sure you get a government check, have a play. You may not be exactly what you want, where you want to sleep, but they'll get your government check. They'll give you a place to sleep. They'll do all that for you.
Well, Joe, when you talk about government, you also talk about it in your book. You can trust government? And that's another question you're asking.
Yeah, well, think about what's been sold by a certain group in the country, the people on the left progressives, that government is there to protect you, and not just with the big bad military, Rick. Mm-hmm. They're there to make sure that you have enough food on your table. They're there to make sure you have an apartment. They're there to make sure you have health care. And as Nancy Pelosi says, if you don't want to work, you should be able to go out and pursue your creative side. If art is your thing, a job shouldn't get in the way of you chasing your artistic career. The government can help you.
Here on the Conservative Commandos radio show, we're talking with Joe Messina, host of The Real Side, which is part of the Conservative Commandos radio network, heard here every day, Monday through Friday from 2 to 3 p.m. Joe's got a great new book out. I'll say it's a great book because I'll tell you what I like about it. It's an easy read for me, and I love things that are easy read that make sense. And the book is Ramblings of a Right-Wing, Bible-Thumping White Guy. Now, I don't have to practice the title like Joe Messina did. It just flows right out. Joe, in your book, you tackle all the taboo subjects. Yeah, you tackle government, you tackle religion, and you also tackle the R word, the racism word. And you talk about it in context of the left needs racism.
Well, what else do they have? What are their other arguments? If you think about the fight that they've been having with us for 20 years or against the right, it's always been we don't care about blacks, we don't care about Hispanics, we don't care about anybody who's an old white guy. So, racism is easy to play on. Racism is easy to pump up. And if you really think about it, who is the racist group? If you really think about progressive Democrats, what do they always say? Black people are too dumb to figure out how to get an ID. Black people are too dumb to get a job to have enough money to get an ID. Black people need to have welfare because they really can't get a job that'll pay them enough. They need help in school. They need a leg up because they're too dumb to take the test to get them in. Think about what they're saying about the black community. And again, I think Donald hit a nerve this year when he said, for 60 years you've been voting for these people. Where are you at? How bad could you do by voting for me? So the left really, without racism, take that out of the picture for them. And in all fairness and honesty, what else do they have left to run on? There's nothing there.
Well, also in your book, another one of the titles is "Can They Only Win by Lying?" So, Joe, you can wrap up lying as one of the tools that the Democrats, the liberals use to maintain and control power, their power base, their voting base.
Yeah, because they're twisted. They twist the truth. I call it lying. Everybody else calls it misspeak and twisting. But they twist the truth to make it look like they're the champions of everything. Look at, they lost the election because the Russians hacked the DNC servers, when in reality, they didn't hack the DNC servers at all. And let's say they did hack the DNC servers. All they did was turn up the truth about how the Democrats feel about Hispanics, blacks, and others that they say that they're the champions for, when in reality, they're not the champions for in any stretch. They have to lie about these things to make themselves look good, to make themselves look like the champion. So it is the only thing they have to stand on, seriously, when you break it down.
Our guest this segment, Joe Messina. The book is Ramblings of a Right-Wing, Bible-Thumping White Guy. You know, Joe, you and I and George, we're part of the most discriminated against group of people there are today. Seriously, white, middle-aged, heterosexual Christian males. I mean, my gosh.
It doesn't get any worse than that. You know, somebody asked me, really, if you had like 10 seconds in an elevator to sum up the book, I go, look, it's all the things that a Bible-thumping white guy is not supposed to talk about, or he's a hater, right? I can't talk about an abortion because I don't have female parts. I can't talk about black issues because I'm not black. I can't talk about women. I mean, I can go down the whole list of things that we get beat up for, when in reality, these are all human issues. They're not color issues. They're not female. They're human issues that we should all be able to talk about.
Joe Messina, great talking with you, my friend. Please tell our audience how to follow your book, or how to get your book, follow and listen to your radio show, and also your writings.
So you can find the book on Amazon.com. You get it faster from them than from me. If you want an autographed copy, you can find it on my website, therealside.com. I'll get an autograph. I'll get it out to you as fast as I can. Stations, times, my writings, everything can be found at therealside.com. And Rick, one more nasty word on your show. I hope you, your family, and your listeners have a Merry Christmas. And if they celebrate Hanukkah, may you have a blessed Hanukkah.
Merry Christmas to you and your wife, Tammy. Take care. God bless, Joe.
God bless you, too.
Thank you so much for joining us. George, I want to thank you for sitting in today as my co-host. I also want to thank Andrew Harrod as coming on today. Also, our most recent guest, Joe Messina. I want to thank Mr. John Forsythe Jr. for working the boards. But for right now, we're out of time. We got to run. We got to go. Take care. God bless. Have a Merry Christmas. We'll see you next week on the radio.